Hey everybody, it's Mike again, Mike Yao with Savage Kingdoms role-playing game Fire in the Head Productions. Thought I would do another video. We're all self-quarantined these days, so people like us who like to do videos, it's good for us. Gives us something to do. Been doing a lot of writing, working on the Savage Kingdoms game system, and just in general, and as an actor, not really any scripts to get off the book except for a movie I'm doing, a short film in a couple of weeks. Last I heard from the production company, it's still happening. So I have to kind of look at that script a little bit soon, playing the main villain, so that'll be fun. Other than that, not much to read or write other than Savage Kingdoms and doing some videos. So this is another video for the Kickstarter campaign. And again, it'll probably end up on the website as well at some point. So this one is about magic in Savage Kingdoms, because we get, I probably get the second most questions about that. The first most probably being about character creation, which is one I did yesterday and posted, or actually posted this morning. So this is about magic and sorcery in the Savage Kingdoms 3rd edition role-playing game. So, reason I say sorcery, Savage Kingdoms, as you probably know, is actually more of a sword and sorcery themed game than it is high fantasy. It's kind of in between the two, but it probably leans more sword and sorcery, which is what I wanted, what I like. So it's a little darker and gritty. So, as such, often magic that we kind of, it's a term that gets thrown around all the time. I think it's a really broad term, actually. That doesn't mean a whole lot sometimes. So when the term sorcery is being used, it's almost a little derogatory in sword and sorcery. That's why in sword and sorcery fantasy, often the sword-wielding hero is generally the hero or the anti-hero in the case of like Conan. And those who use sorcery are usually the evil, vile ones. They're kind of using trickery and treachery and trafficking with demons to get all these secrets that we would call spells. So the sword wielding hero with the cold steel is often sort of the protagonist in the very end, at least, if not the hero. And those who dabble in sorcery are the bad guys. So often that is kind of true in the Savage Kingdoms setting. Some of the players I've played with, great players, and I love them, but some of them don't quite. I don't think they've read enough Sword and Sorcery. They don't quite get that that's kind of the thing. It's I think they're used to kind of Dungeons and Dragons, or just sort of wandering around, and almost everyone is using magic to some degree, or wizardry, sorcery. Priest spells, some people might call miracles, but in any case, some degree of magic is kind of being tossed around. So Savage Kingdoms and settings like it, I prefer where magic is more mystical and more mysterious and lives up to its actual term. If you look up the word magic, the first definition is something that's wondrous and cannot be explained by science. At least that used to be the first entry into it. I haven't looked at it in a few years, but that's one of the definitions in any case. So that implies something that's wondrous and miraculous to some degree. Now, that's not to say that magic is completely rare and uncommon in Savage Kingdoms. I've described it before as a high mysticism, low fantasy game. And what that means is high mysticism in the fact that since it's a kind of a Dark Ages setting for the most part, some of the cultures are still sort of in an age of antiquity. And a few cultures are kind of rising into an early Middle Ages, early medieval era. Still, the average person sees the gods and supernatural things in almost everything, even thunderstorms, or the fact that there's a drought, or the fact that a child was stillborn, or something like that. That is usually looked at as a curse, or the gods are displeased and demand a sacrifice or something. So that stuff is really fun to delve into role-playing wise, and should not be overlooked. And that's kind of where the seat of magic and sorcery comes from. The magical arts are learned in order to subvert these things from happening, these droughts and these stillborn children, or people that are healthy that need curing. So that's where healing magic comes from, or warding magic, so nobody gets hurt in the first place. Protective magic, that sort of thing. So in the Savage Kingdoms world, many traditions have developed over time where these traditions often delve into the magical secrets of the magical arts, as we call them. Um, in a game, excuse me, I just like sneezed everywhere. Not good. At least I'm in the comfort of my own home, right? Not having to wear a mask and all of that. So, apologies. Where was that magical arts? So, in the game sense of the magical arts, there are 7 magical arts skills, which we call disciplines: air, earth, fire, water, life, death, and shadow magic. So pretty much any spell can be will fall into one of those 7 categories, and several fair number of spells fall into 2 and sometimes even 3 categories. There might even be a spell that's in 4 categories, and those are often broader spells that almost any tradition or magician may try to learn, such as a warding spell or consecration or something like that, something that's almost more universal. There's no such thing as a detect magic spell. That's such a thing that every magician, I think, would learn. That's actually just a given. So if you know the magical arts skill, and you want to sense magic in the area, you make a magical arts roll. You roll at your highest. The difficulty level is only 10 if you're touching the object or whatever it is, or that you're trying to detect magic upon. And so it's easier if you're touching. It also doesn't cost any stamina, but you are risking like touching something that could curse you or whatever. If you want to do it at range, it's a 5-yard range, and it costs a stamina point, and the difficulty level is 15, but it's probably a little safer. If you succeed, you sense whether or not there's a magical aura, and its relative strength. I think it runs from, if I can recall, from dim to overwhelming or very strong or something like that. There's basically kind of 4 ratings, and the GM's free to kind of describe it any way he wants, but keeping that in mind, you also sense whatever type or discipline of magic that the magical aura is, whether it's earth or life or shadow or fire or whatever. If you critically seek, oh no, wait, actually, it's not. If you get a 15 or 25 or better, wow, I can't remember my own rules. Always do this off the top of my head because I'd assume I know my own rules better than I do. I think it's 25. If you get a 25 or better, which is 5 less than a critical success, you sense the general purpose of the magic. So basically, in a sense, really what it does. So if it were you sense magic on a pillar with runes on it that radiated, say, moderate earth magic. If you rolled high enough, the 25 or better, you might sense that it is, in fact, what it actually does. Perhaps the pillar was recently shaped by an earth shaping spell, or maybe it's still active as a earth shaping spell. It actually can morph and transmute every so often. Perhaps if you read the runes correctly on it, you can actually shape the pillar, something like that. So that's how that works. So there is no detect magic spell. It's just if you are gifted, if you're trained in magical arts, any of them, even just one skill level in any one of them, you can attempt to detect magic, basically, or sense magic. The other thing that you can do for free, so say in Dungeons and Dragons, there's the read magic spell. Again, that's utilitarian. I think pretty much any magician of even the most semi-literate culture is going to learn how spells are often written and what sort of code they're used, what sort of language or script is being used. So you can do that as well. So we'll use the same pillar as an example. There's some bizarre writing on there. Most characters probably say, I'll make a language roll to see if I can decipher it. And that's great if it's a more like a mystical language, like it's encoding like a spell or or maybe it was written by a sorcerer of an ancient tradition using the way that they describe spells. Then it might be considered magical writing, and then you could use magical arts instead of language to decipher it. So, learning spells too. You make a magical arts roll. So those are all ways to use the magical arts skill without actually spells. So the other thing about magical arts skill is that it is you do learn magical spells in a more mechanical sense. So I think I covered this briefly in character creation video, but to reiterate, you for every odd number skill level that you have in a magical art or any if you have several magical arts, that's how many spells that you know. So, for example, say a character creation, you build a character that's really good at, say, water magic and has 3 skill levels in water magic. So at skill level 1, you learn to spell, and at skill level 3, you learn to spell. If your intellect is high enough and you have like the acolyte talent, I think apprentice too, you get a bonus spell. If you join an actual tradition, like you choose the elite affiliation talent, you can become a member of a priesthood or even another somewhat secular magical society, sort of like the Circle of the Raven or Order of the Golden Crucible. That can give you access to perhaps even another secret or two about whether it's a spell or some bonuses to magical arts rolls or whatever. So that's another way to add to that, is to perhaps join a magical society. So role-playing wise, and back more to the setting and the thematics of magic, those who are not a member of a tradition, particularly of, say, if you were traveling through a particular realm, we'll say the Larinthian Empire, which is very much like based kind of on ancient Rome. The only sort of recognized magical tradition within that realm is the Order of the Golden Crucible. It's the only one the Emperor Octavius V, kind of indoctrinates and is sort of made legal. It's based on alchemy. There's still magic involved, but a lot of the spells, alchemy is like a big thing that's taught there too. Alchemy and magical arts are pretty separate in the game. They're actually 2 different skills, but they also sort of come together in a way as well. So when you're thinking alchemy, think more in a sense of not only Middle Ages, medieval alchemy, but also in the sense of the way alchemy was used in the Hyperborean age of Conan. I know I keep going back to Robert E. Howard's Conan, but it's the penultimate example of sword and sorcery. So if you read in some of those books, alchemy is very mysterious. I mean, there's oils and powders and things, but there's usually some weird uh, quasi-magical effect that happens, like, some sorcerer slams down, or alchemist slams down a vial and some weird vapor comes out and it's extremely poisonous, or it's acidic or something like that. So think of alchemy more, and you probably are more in the sense of not only the Middle Ages, the philosophy that, trying to transmute things into gold, that sort of thing, but also making really sort of quasi magical things. So alchemy, in some ways, is sort of a shortcut around magic, but then also alchemy is sometimes looked at as the purest form of magic. Kind of depends on the cult. Like in the East, alchemy or alchemia is more of a thing. In the West, it's a little more suspicious, whereas traditional magical arts is somewhat less suspicious. So, so yeah, if you're not a member of a tradition that's particularly one of the culture or kingdom that you're traveling through, then you're going to have some issues casting sorcery or magic in the open unless you're a member of the society. Another example, we say you're traveling through Malovia. And we'll say that you're not even a Malovian, you're an Outlander. So racially, ethnically speaking, you're not even Malovian. Maybe you speak some of the language, and that's fine, and that's about it. And you're seen kind of using magic openly. You're probably going to be questioned and now you probably won't be, because Malovians are a little more sort of used to magic, but again, it's controlled, it's played at the hip. It's like in real life, people like to sort of control the resources. Anything that's new and rare, that people try to, a lot of people try to control that because they don't want just anyone getting access to it. It takes a while, even in our modern culture, for things that are new to sort of be released to the greater unwashed masses, such as ourselves. And this would definitely be true in such things as alchemy and the 7 magical disciplines of magical arts, or magic and sorcery in general. So if you were a priest of Andorok, we'll say that's an accepted tradition in Malovia, and you're using that. That's fine, because that's what you're supposed to do. It's like being a knight in, say, the realm of Eredorn, and you're walking around openly carrying weapons and wearing armor and traveling on a huge horse with armor. Nobody really suspects you. In fact, most people are probably very comforted by the fact that you're there. Is that? But say you were to travel through another realm that doesn't support that sort of culture, that sort of open carrying of such armaments and arms, then people are probably very suspicious, and probably very nervous. So think of it like that. So yeah, magic, in my opinion, in tabletop role playing games, any tabletop role playing game. I'm not speaking just for Savage Kingdoms, but in my experience, if it's not supported by a deep tradition within the setting, like it's part of the history and part of the fabric, it doesn't really work. Then it's just kind of whimsical, and people are just, I cast magic missile and are doing weird things, and it doesn't really connect to the deeper fabric of what's going on. It's also not very mystical because everybody's just kind of using it, and it therefore becomes less magical. So another thing I'd like to remark about magic before I wrap up is the Savage Kingdom's magic is actually the average person that can use it is ritual based. So ritual magic is more common than what is called in the rule book a spontaneous magic or battle magic or combat magic, meaning that you're casting it just in a couple of seconds as one action. So most adventurers do it like that, but a lot of NPCs and adventurers too, the smart ones, use ritual magic. So a spell in general takes an hour if you're going to cast it, the ritual version of it. You have to have some accoutrement, some components that are listed in the spell description. You have to have at least two of the four that are usually listed, three or more if it's like a higher DL spell. And it's all written in there. It breaks it down for you. It's pretty simple. Most things are pretty easy, like just candles, certain color candles that are sympathetic to that type of magic, like red candles for fire, white for life magic, etc. Often fit the bill. These are fairly common to a lot of the spells. Pure water or bowl of pure water. Eggshells that represent life, beginning of life, a hatching of a creature. They're often attuned to life magic. So a lot of these items that I've came up with are from historical magic. They're sympathetic to the spells, what people actually believed, which is nice because it's easy to intuit an object like, oh, that makes sense. I'm using cold iron for a spell against to ward against fairies, against fey folk. So something sympathetic to magic. Now, there's some items that are like I have no idea why we're using a dragon scale, except for the fact that dragons are very magical creatures. A dragon scale works probably in a lot of different spells. Or maybe you need a pinch of soot from a recent fire, or a certain color of pigment of paint, or something like that. Gem dust, silver dust, etc. A lot of these are, probably fairly common to fantasy literature. So a ritual takes an hour. It gives you the benefit of gaining a +2 to your magical arts roll after the ritual. You can even get up to a +3. There's every spell list really rare components that if you happen to have, it gives you another +1 to your magical arts rolls for rituals. I use an example as a dragon scale, or a dragon bone might be something, or a lock of hair from a fire giant or frost giant. Things like that could be uh, get you, and it's listed in each spell. They give you that extra +1, so you could end up with a +3 bonus in addition to your regular bonus to magical arts roll. So you can see in that case, it doesn't sound like a huge amount, but it ends up often being like a big deal. So when you cast a ritual spell, you do get that bonus. So a lot of spells, you might ask, why would you take an hour to cast, especially if it's something that's a spontaneous effect? Well, normally you wouldn't. Uh, Except for some extreme example, say you're in this big mass battle and there's ritual was happening in this huge scale battle, and you're trying to get this spell off with your apprentices in an amount of time. But in general, yeah, that's not going to work. So the way you work around that is I covered it in the character creation video. There's a talent called Enchant Talisman that you can store the spell into this talismanic object that lasts for 24 hours. The spell lasts in the object for 24 hours or 48 hours if you gain a critical success on your magical arts roll when casting the spell. So that's one way around it. Obviously, enchanting permanent objects do even more. Even that's like, way even above that. That's really rare to learn, but it is an option in the game. So yeah, that's kind of how all that works together. So when you're not casting a spell as a ritual, most spells are just like one action, which 6-second round. So that represents 2 or 3 seconds. So the spell's very condensed. You're only speaking several particularly keywords of magic and power. You're tracing runes in the air with at least one hand. One hand does have to be free as you're casting the spell, and you have to speak words. I'll counter contradict myself now from saying that because you don't actually have to. That's the normal way to cast a spell. You can choose to cast a spell with your hands not moving, like you're carrying a shield and a sword, or you're carrying a body or a chest, and you can still try to cast a spell, but it is a -5 penalty or magical arts roll. There's a talent called Silence is Power, or no, Power of Words, which allow you that your words are far more potent than your gestures. So gestures don't really matter. If you have that talent, you don't suffer penalties of not being able to make somatic gestures with your hands, tracing runes in the air and that kind of stuff. It's all based on your words. There's another talent called Silence is Power, which allows you to be able to manipulate magic with your hands, but you don't have to speak. So that's kind of cool. So you can try to cast a spell without words. Say if you're gagged or you want to be really quiet, you're like hiding in the shadows, and you don't want to tip off somebody that you're there. You can do so at -5 to the magical arts roll, or if you have that talent, Silence is Power, there's no penalty at all. So that's very cool. So that's the way around to do that. You can even try to cast a spell without words and without gestures, to just by pure thought. Say you're completely tied up or you're pretending to be dead or something. You can try to do it. It's at -10 though, because it's double those two -5 penalties. If you happen to have both of those talents, then there's no penalty. Those talents are pretty hard to get. You have to have a pretty fair amount of training in magical arts, meaning skill levels in the game mechanics terminology. All right. So to wrap up, just in brief, magical arts. Yep, big. Oh, right. One last thing. I think I covered it in character creation, but since this is all thematically part of magical arts, let me throw it in there again. Magical arts is the only skill or skills, because again, there's like technically 7 sub skills or disciplines of magical arts that you have to have a talent to in order to even attempt to do. Any other skill, any of the other 27 skills, you can, even without a skill level in it, meaning that you don't have any training, you can still try it just using your raw attribute that's governing it. But magical arts, you have to have a gateway talent, as I call it. So those are magic affinity, apprentice, acolyte, dabbling arcanist, and I think holy warrior. Right now, there might be 1 or 2 more in the second book if it hopefully if that comes out, depending on what the Kickstarter does. It'll probably still come out in at least some capacity. So you would have to have at least one of those. Just really quickly, magic affinity is like it says, you're an affinity for magic, a natural knack for it that you're sort of born with. To use a Harry Potter term, like Harry Potter, having that bloodline. Or you could be more of a muggle, and you've had to learn more through a scrappy means. That would be the way to do that would be apprentice. You apprentice to some kind of half wild mage or sorcerer who's taught you a couple spells, or 1 discipline of magic. Another way to do that is being an acolyte in a religious or at least mystical society. Doesn't mean you're still in it, because then you would have to choose elite affiliation and choose that one of those orders. It just means it might have been that you had some training in it and you just didn't like it or got kicked out or something. But you took that knowledge with you of 1 or 2 magical disciplines that you can perhaps still continue to advance in. Dabbling Arcanus is even probably the lowest level, sort of gritty one that you like learned in the streets. You find some old moldering scrolls or some old tome, and you just happen to, I'll use that pillar example with the weird writing on it, and you visited that thing every day, and just finally deciphered all these bizarre writings and formula and managed to learn a spell out of it. So that's just a single spell from any discipline. You don't really know. It's just, you learned it raw. You don't really, your training doesn't go any further than that. You would have to choose another another talent to continue that. So if you just want to learn 1 spell, that's one way to do it. So very quickly, another way, let's see, the Aluna Shi and the Dark Shi, the only races that start with a spell no matter what, because they actually all are gifted with magic affinity, is a free talent as part of their race. So they actually get to start with Glamour, Conjure Light, or Beguile, I think, are the options there. Those are So yeah, so even if they don't have any training in it, they still know how to cast a spell. Now, their skill roll is probably not going to be that great since they haven't really studied it. But yeah, they still have it as part of their race. That's the only race I think that gets the Golden Sleer get Magic Affinity discounted by 2 points, but they do not get it for free. But they almost do. It costs 1 point for them. So I think that covers all sort of the magical arts thematically, also the way it works game mechanically. Um, you it's like any other spell. Like I said in the other video, you roll a d20, add your total modifier of whatever magical arts it is. Say you're casting Conjure Flame spell, so that would you would roll magical arts fire, excuse me, and add whatever your total bonus in that, which is willpower plus your skill level, and then if you have any bonuses in another category, it's all totaled out on your sheet. So say you have a +5 bonus in magical arts fire, the difficulty level is only 10 to like light a candle or just flames appear in your hands without burning you. Otherwise, it'd be kind of a crappy spell. You would only need a 10. DL 15 is if you want to make a weapon burst into flame. And a lot of spells in Savage Kingdoms you'll notice work. Actually, most of them have have at least 2 different applications. That way, you don't have to. We don't have to have like 884 spells to cover every single little thing. We can only have the 250 or 300 that we have because several spells cover sort of really, like for example, Conjure Lightning, to use a D&D analog, is a Shocking Grasp, and also putting lightning on a weapon, that all in the same spell. It's just the difficulty level is a little higher, and the higher one might cost you more stamina. So quickly on that note, so whenever you do cast a spell, it does cost you a number of stamina points. Magic and sorcery, excuse me, spells are fueled by stamina, just like combat maneuvers and a lot of other things. So that's a really cool, a universal mechanic. It also gives you a good reason. You can build the old argument about building a warrior mage. Works perfect in the system because the stamina system. So if you want to have fancy combat maneuvers and cast magic, you totally can, but it's probably going to eat a lot of your stamina. It's going to take a lot of your inner strength to do so. Also, wearing armor gives you it pings your magical art skill. So there are like 7 or 8 skills that have asterisks next to them in the skill section of your character sheet. Those are armor dependent skills. So if you're wearing enough armor to have, say, a -3 penalty to those skills, whenever you cast magical arts is one of them. Whenever you cast a spell, you would have a -3 penalty if you're wearing that armor. Now, obviously, you could take it off or perform a ritual without it, which is how it would probably traditionally have been done, so to speak. So to get around that, but in battle, you're probably gonna have that penalty because you're probably gonna be wearing that armor. So that's kind of a cool way around that. Stamina fuels it. A note on stamina: in previous editions, you only spent half your stamina if you failed the spell roll, and third edition, it's always the full amount because, as I mentioned in another video, the magic always works. It never like fizzles or like nothing when you speak. It either so if you don't succeed in the skill roll, it actually just means it does not manifest the way you want it to. So I guess in a way, I guess it does kind of fizzle, but it just kind of goes off. But it still is invoked through you, and that's why you spend the full stamina. That's actually one reason you spend the full stamina, because thematically it makes sense. But B, record keeping wise, it's a lot easier to deal with that. Like, oh wait, that was half that time. So we found it in playtesting would be a lot easier. You also start with a little bit more stamina than you did in the other previous editions with the way the formula works, so it balances out actually. So yeah, I think that's probably it about the magical arts, magic and sorcery in general in Savage Kingdoms, and the way it works. And I might do a video later on talking about the cosmology of the world, because the magical arts in some way can kind of tie into that as well. But I thought that was a little too much for this video, so I think that's enough. Thanks for listening and staying in tune, and I will talk to you guys again soon, and stay safe.